Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We are from KD1. We are going to present about Wahabism in Malaysia. Our group consists 5 members: Nurul Ain binti Suhaimi, Nur Atira binti Zakaria, Nabilah binti Nik Sulaiman, Nelly Huda binti Muhammad Halim, and me myself, Nur Alia Natasha binti Muhammad Ramli, the first presenter of this group. The emergence of new groups in every religion is inevitable. In Islam itself, there are many new groups that have existed. Among them are the Mu'tazilah, Jabariyah, Qadariyah, and many more. However, our study was conducted to discuss about Wahabism. In Munjik Dictionary state that Wahabism is a part of the Islamic section developed by Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab. His opponents call him Wahabism, but his followers call themselves Al-Muwahhidun, and their tariqat was called Al-Muhammadiyah. In fiqh, they adhere to the Hanbali school, adapted to the tafsir of Ibn Taymiyyah. This movement was also the continuity and reformation of Ibn Taymiyyah's principle, based on two main points, which are a pure Aqidah, free from the elements which lead to shirk, such as tombs visitation, tabarruk, tawassul, and istighasah. Second is following acts in accordance to what Prophet Muhammad taught and against the acts of bid'ah. In this study, there are 4 chapters that will be discussed. First, we are going to explore the history and the emergence of Wahabism in Malaysia. We will go through the doctrines of Wahabism. Next, we will examine the effects of Wahhabist thought among Malaysian Muslims. And lastly, in chapter 4, we will look at the efforts made by government to curb the spread of Wahhabism in our country.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. My name is Nabilah binti Nik Sulaiman with numbermetry 1191811. And now we look to the historical of Wahabism. Wahabism is one of the Islamic reform movement founded by Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab that began in the region of Najd in what is today Saudi Arabia. He was adopted in 1744 by the Saudi family, and the term Wahhabi is used by outsiders to differentiate the movement, while adherents often refer to themselves as Salafi, a term used by followers of Islamic reform movement. They condemn all acts that they see as implying polytheism, which is shirk, such as visiting graves and venerating saints, and advocate to a return to the original teaching of Islam as embodied in the Quran and Sunnah, while all the sources of doctrine such as usul fiqh as innovation, which is bid'ah. Wahabism theology and jurisprudence, which are based on the theologian Ibn Taymiyyah's teaching and Ahmad bin Hanbal legal teaching, emphasize literal interpretation of the Quran and Sunnah, as well as the construction of an Islamic society based on these two sources of literature. Around 1740, Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab began spreading his belief in the Oasis town of Furamila. Despite the fact that his father was a Hanbali jurist, his ideas were rooted in the Hanbali school of law. However, they were rejected by local Hanbali officials, and he was exiled first from Huramila and then from Uyaina. The preeminence of the Wahhabi religious establishment in the late 20th and 21st centuries ensured that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia remained considerably more conservative than other regions. A massive religious police force, also known as the Mutawa'un, enforce severe public behavior norms such as gender segregation and mandatory observance of Islamic ritual. They prohibit the adoration of shrine, graves, and sacred things that associate with the early history of Islam. Up to 75% of ancient sites in Mecca and Medina areas have been demolished. While we look to the emergence of Wahabism in Malaysia, the establishment of Salafi theology in Malaysia has gone through three significant periods. First, the early 20th century reformist era, and second, the Islamic revivalism period, and then the internet and globalization period. Okay, Malaysia start to experience the influence of Salafiyah Tajdid movement with the emergence of Islam figure that were against the practice of khurafat and bid'ah. Local students who study in Mecca and Medina extend Salafi Wahhabi influence across Malaysia. It was presumably started during the reign of Muhammad bin Saud in Saudi Arabia. The attempt to infiltrate the Malay society, which result in the alignment of the community to combat the aspect of Shirik. The kaum tua and kaum muda conflict was a term used to describe disputes amongst ulama in the Malay world. The conflict was between the ulama in the establishment in the rural region and the modernist ulama, and the major distinction between these two groups was in how they interpreted tradition. One of kaum tua distinguishing was their Sufi orientation. As Sufis, they tolerate indigenous Malay rituals such as kenduri, zikir, and maulid. The kaum tua believe that these act had become part of the Islamic tradition, and they also consider that the truth revealed in the teaching of Islamic scholars such as Imam Ghazali and the Madhab Imam did not to be contested, since it was not altered by the time in change and condition. For these ulama, the re-examination of the Quran and Hadith was not only useless but also dangerous, since it may lead to misunderstanding and mistake.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Nurul Ain binti Suhaimi. Now, let's look into the doctrines of Wahabism. Among the main essence of the teaching of Wahabism was deliberately a call for the return of all Muslim communities to the original principle of Islam based on Quran and Hadith. The Wahhabis discouraged the Muslims from merely depending on the authority of medieval schools or ijma' by any ulama that had the last word in Islamic jurisprudence, which means that no independent thinking or known as ijtihad was allowed. Second, the repudiation of all innovations contrary to the practices of the Prophet Muhammad SAW and the early generations of pious Muslims. Muhammad Abdul Wahab said that, in their view, innovation is an act that has emerged after the 3rd century and is absolutely reprehensible. Furthermore, the Wahhabis state that the innovation is the act of creating new things in religious matters, known as innovation, and all forms of innovation are heretical, as recorded in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. Therefore, according to the Wahhabism, it becomes an obligation to reject the innovation. This may be done because of their passion to eradicate innovation, to protect Islam, so that they have gone too far in defining innovation itself, and as a result, the community reject the da'wah from them. The third one is related to Tawheed. Muhammad Abdul Wahab defines Tawheed as affirming Allah fully in all deeds and acts of worship. He divided Tawheed into three parts, which is Tawheed Uluhiyah, Tawheed Rububiyah, and Tawheed Asma wa Sifat. First, let's look into Tawheed Uluhiyah. Tawheed Uluhiyah means that worship is only to Allah alone without associating Him with others. Second, Tawheed Rububiyah means belief that there is a God who created the universe and all His creature. And the last part is Tawheed Asma wa Sifat. That includes belief in all the attributes, substance, and names of Allah as contained in the Quran and Sunnah. Now, let's look into the last point in the doctrines of Wahhabism. The fourth one is the radical attitude of the Wahhabis in matters of religion to the point of disbelief and murder. Muhammad Abdul Wahab has been mentioned as a person who liked to disbelieve people and believe that kill them, which is a Muslim, is permissible in Islam. This accusation has made him resemble the Khawarij group. Besides, Sulaiman Abdul Wahab mentioned that his brother Muhammad Abdul Wahab and his followers claiming individuals who do not follow their teachings are infidels. Hersi Muhammad Hilal said that Muhammad Abdul Wahab did not deny this accusation that made by his brother Sulaiman, and from there the spread of slander against them as disbelieving Muslims happened. And we also have to know that there are two things that have been emphasized by Muhammad Abdul Wahab before accusing people of being infidels. Okay, the first one is there is evidence in the Quran and Sunnah that shows the act is infidel in fact. The second one is the law must be appropriate to the individual after his act meets the conditions that make him an infidel, and there is no reason to prevent infidel accusations against him, then the individual is considered as an infidel. That's all from me.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Nur Atira binti Zakaria. I will explain about the effect of Wahhabist thought among Malaysia. The National Fatwa Council has decided that the Wahhabi is not suitable to be practiced in Malaysia because the country practices the creed of Ahlus-Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Wahhabi has the potential to affect Malaysia. It has the potential to cause confusion as one of its side effects. What is not accepted with the Wahhabist thought when it lets the thought practitioner is more extreme, said Tan Sri Dr. Abdul Shukur Hussain, Chairman of the National Fatwa Committee. When asked if this trend practitioner would be prevented from spreading it to others, Dr. Abdul Shukur said it depended on the respective state enactment to prevent such irregularities. Each state has the authority to declare a fatwa. The actions of the Islamic Religious Councils of Negeri Sembilan, which issue a fatwa prohibiting the group of Wahabism in the state, are surely not contradictory because it does not want confusion in the Muslim population in the state. Another effect of Wahhabism is the loss of political power. The federal or state government should understand that giving any religious office space, such as mufti, qadi, religious affair officer, or giving religious credential to those who have Salafi Wahhabi understanding, will divide families, communities, mass institutions, and Muslims in Malaysia. Since the arrival of Islam, Malaysia has followed the doctrine of Al-Sunnah wal Jama'ah, a Shafi'i sect, but it also harbours other schools of fiqh, such as Ash'ari and Maturidi ideas, and Sufism based on Imam Junaid al-Baghdadi, Imam al-Ghazali, and other tariqat muqtabar. The long-term effect of celebrating Salafi Wahhabi is to weaken Islam from within, which could eventually bring down the political power of Muslims in Malaysia one day. That's all from me. In addition, Wahhabist thought also can lead to extreme or radical acts among the young, which encourage war and strife. The study of Wahhabi issues will aid in comprehending the debate over jihad and radicalism that may be witnessed in today's terrorist groups. The doctrine, which was described as becoming more contagious and prominent, has infiltrated the souls of young people, driving some of them to join Daesh or other Islamic militant groups. According to a spokesman for the Federation of Malay Islamic Nusantara Forces, he stated that the ideology must be put to an end right away, since it is believed that it will continue to develop and confuse Muslims, particularly the youth of the Malaysia.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I am Nilhuda binti Halim, and I would like to present about government efforts to curb the spread of Wahabism. According to Prof. Emeritus Tan Sri Datuk Dr. Abu Shukr Hussein, it is not an exaggeration if we conclude that the Malaysian Muslim community, especially the public in terms of Aqidah, Ash'ariyah ideology, is synonym with Al-Sunnah. Therefore, when this trend is discussed and introduced into the society, even for scholarly purposes, the Muslim community feels odd and restless because there are differences with what they understand and believe. As a result of several discussions in the National Fatwa Committee Muzakara and the Jakim Aqidah Review Panel meeting, all decisions were to curb the spread of Wahhabism on the grounds that the issues raised could threaten the unity of Muslims in Malaysia. The stand of the Malaysian Islamic Development Department JAKIM and the government is also clear that Wahhabism is not suitable to be practiced in this country because it is feared that it could lead to the division of Muslims. Therefore, there are several government efforts in addressing this issue among Muslims. Firstly, the government efforts in terms of the existence of provisions restricting false teaching. In the early stages, it was found that there were already several provisions relating to elemental control that could lead to the spread of deviant teachings, such as teaching religion without permission and printing religious books without the permission of the Sultan. The relevant provisions are either under the Criminal Offences Enactment or Enactment of the Administration of Islamic Law. Among the statutes identified contains provisions relating to the offence is the law offences of Muslims. Now, 5 decades after Merdeka, the law has been refined and added to make it appropriate to the situation and challenges faced in the present. Secondly, law enforcement and fatwas and the restoration of faith. The government's effort in addressing the spread and practice of heresy in this country, there are 3 aspects that are emphasized. Firstly, in terms of status teachings themselves, whether fatwa or not. Secondly, involving eradication efforts, namely the prevention of the spread and enforcement of fatwas, as well as the law. And thirdly, it is related to rehabilitation efforts, returning the followers of heresy to the bottom of path through restoration creeds and beliefs. In these issues, fatwas issued by any state fatwa committee or national has not yet had any good effect in terms of neither enforcement nor legislative power. Fatwas issued are merely explaining the legal position of a thing, and it is not bound to follow. Only after it is gazetted does it have power in terms of legislation, meaning that every Muslim is bound and necessarily comply with the fatwa. Other than that, it should be noted that once the fatwa gazetted, the implication is that whoever violates it, the fatwa may be prosecuted based on that law. For example, Section 12 of the Islamic Sharia Criminal Enactment 1995, it is because not complying with the fatwa. Thirdly, enforcement and prosecution actions in terms of gathering of evidence and information. The prosecution on a case of heresy depends on the strength of the evidence gathered by the investigation unit of the enforcement division under the Islamic Religion Department State. When there is a complaint regarding activities related to heresy, religious enforcement officers need to conduct intelligence in advance to identify the state of the reported activity. This is important because in conducting investigations, the focus of information and evidence gathering must be directed to meet the elements of the offense complaint. Although the religious authorities have a rule that they can only act if there is a complaint, however, they can use the power of discretion so that among themselves they become a complainant. When the prosecution is successfully done in court, the suspect is heretical and will be tried, and the court will determine their status of whether they are guilty or not. If they are found guilty, then the punishment is imminent and must also include the process of restoration of faith that only can be implemented at Islamic guidance centers as provided under the State Sharia Criminal Offences Act or Enactment Section. Suspect of heresy will also be sentenced to be sent to Islamic guidance centers as one mandatory sentence, not exceeding 6 months in lieu of ordinary imprisonment. In short, there is no doubt that Malaysia is an Islamic country guided by the policy of Ahl-Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Aqidah, Sharia and Akhlaq of the Ummah are always maintained in line with the principles contained in the policy. That's all from me. Thank you.
The fact is that the task of safeguarding the faith of Muslims in Malaysia is not only on the shoulders of the government alone, but also on Muslims individuals. Muslims who has knowledge on things involving radical ideology should spread awareness to the community as an effort to clean up and make the community aware of the dangerous ideologies that is targeting Muslims, especially in Malaysia. Associate Professor Dr. Muhammad Hizam Hanafiah stressed that Muslim individuals in Malaysia need to be more sensitive and identify who are the bearers and spreaders of Salafi Wahhabi ideology. Furthermore, living in this modern age, everything is available at your fingertips. If we observe deeply on the social sites, religious speakers spread like fire. What is disturbing is when they convey their wrong ideologies and successfully plant them in the minds of other social media users. That's why Muslims are advised to be wary of people around them and keep away from those who promote Salafi Wahhabi ideology. That's all from us. Thank you for listening to our presentation.